You're listening to the Integrative Health Simplified podcast with Kari, Coody, pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. Here we talk all things straightforward and honest when it comes to holistic health and simplifying your best steps forward while eliminating all the gimmicks and confusion. Leave the overwhelm at the door and get ready for impactful action steps that get to the real root of your issue and actually move the needle in your health. Let's dive into the show. Hey there, it's Kari here, and welcome back into another brand new series on the Integrative Health Simplified podcast. I'm excited to be back with you in the last series in this season 1. I have just so loved starting this podcast in March and going through these different series with you within this first season. And really excited to come back in season 2 at the start of 2024 and dive into even more information that's simplified as to not overwhelm you, but yet educate you in a really simplistic way. Let's just call it that, right? So in today's episode, we are going to be diving into biofilms. And this is part of this series on underlying infections. And I actually put a question box or a poll maybe on Instagram just to see what you guys wanted to hear about. And I know everybody's not on Instagram, but that's really how I like to communicate with my audience a lot of times. And this is what they picked, is to dive more into underlying infections. And so my goal in this series, but also really just in the podcast in general, is to simplify complex topics. And if there ever has been a complex topic, this is it. So underlying infections is definitely a beast. And I've broken them down into various types of underlying infections, but I want to come at these topics and this overarching topic in a non-overwhelming way and in a non-fearful way, because I know sometimes when we look at all these things that we're exposed to, it's like, whoa, our body has so much to combat. And I definitely feel that and understand where that notion is coming from. However, I want you to understand that with any of the things that we're going to talk about, really, in this series of underlying infections, but in general, we're going to have stress in our lives. We're going to come in contact with things that don't need to stay in our body, right? These are things like toxins and chemicals and microbes, and our body is made of these microbial things. But really, it's the problem when our body can't get rid of them like it's supposed to, right? If our body is functioning like it's supposed to optimally, then all of these things should be taken care of by our detoxification system. But it's when our detoxification system isn't working properly, that is when we see these things start to take root and really cause issues. And so I just want to preface this whole series by saying that it's not that we can avoid all of these things. It's simply that we want to help our body to be able to do what it's designed to do. And I do want you to understand, though, whenever it's not working properly, these things are a really big issue. And so hopefully that makes sense in a really just big picture view. So I did pick the topics in a specific order because this is the order that I follow in the roadmap with clients. Whenever they come to see me, especially like a comprehensive client, I'm looking to see what needs to be optimized so that detox pathways can stay open and we can address things as, symptoms are showing and as their blood work is showing. But this is the way and the stepwise approach that you would follow to address underlying infections depending on what somebody has. So first off is biofilms, and you have to think about biofilms first because biofilm is really just a little sack, if you will, that these underlying infections like to produce so that they can basically hide in the body. So they're just kind of like complex communities of microorganisms that form within the body. And it's basically a way, again, that these underlying infections can hide, that they can kind of stay around, and that they can they're not necessarily unnoticed by your body, but they can't be touched by your body, right? They're in this protective sac so that they can stay alive. And so that is something that happens. These biofilms start to form whenever things want to stick around in your body, right? Not if they're just passing through, but if something like a parasite needs to be there, if it needs to be in your body for a certain reason. We're going to talk about that in the very next episode that is specifically about parasites. But parasites stick around a lot of times because we have too much toxicity in our body. And so, that's one reason they stick around. Let's put it that way. And they kind of absorb these toxins and they want to stick around for that reason. Like our body actually needs them for that reason. So a lot of times the root cause isn't really parasites. It's actually why the parasites are sticking around. But whenever they do stick around, they form biofilms, which is kind of like a slimy, sticky sort of, little sac that they like to stick around in. And so they use this protective shield against your white blood cells and immune system. And so it's basically like a protective sac that's made of different DNA strands. And so again, when parasites and Lyme and viruses and bacteria, mold, mycotoxins, all those things like to hide in this biofilm because again, it can survive longer in the body. And so what happens is the immune system recognizes it, like it knows that it's something foreign, but it can't get to it. And this is actually a lot of the reason that we have autoimmune type of issues, because the immune system recognizes it, but it can't get to it. And so then what happens? It's constantly having to stay on. It's basically like on cue because it knows there's something out there that it doesn't like, but it can't get to it. And so whenever this happens over and over and over again, day after day, you can see why your immune system is just on overdrive. And that causes a whole separate, issues for your body. And so biofilm tends to make it to where some of the signs and symptoms and even things that show up on blood work are masked and don't always show up correctly. Because again, your body's going to prioritize what it can deal with at the moment. And so if it can't deal with it, it's definitely not going to prioritize something like an underlying infection. If there's so much stress going on from other ways and from other various things that are going on, it's going to have to put these things in a priority. And so a lot of times underlying infections kind of get on the back burner because so much energy is taken up with just day-to-day activities. And so that's another reason why these things can go on and stay in your system for years and years and years. And so biofilm busting is a huge part of addressing parasites and other underlying infections, because if it's not done, the immune system senses all of these things that are in biofilm 24/7, but can't get to them. And that's why you see a lot of the symptoms that are associated with parasites wear down the immune system, because it's something that your body is constantly having to fight against. And so that's why they have to be addressed first and in this certain order that I'm going to talk about them in, because biofilms hold on to all those things. And then next it's parasites. Well, parasites hold their way in so many different things. And so if you don't address these things in order and you just try to go after something like mold or Lyme or something like that right away, it's not going to go well, because you have to address them in this stepwise order to make sure that you're actually getting rid of the issue in the right way, so that, again, you're not just going in circles, basically. That tends to be what happens if people do things out of order. And so that's a little bit about biofilm in a really, really simplistic manner. There's lots more that we could talk about, but I kind of want to just switch the conversation as I close to what can we do about this? Because again, I'm going to share these things in each episode. Of course, there'll be kind of an ending. Well, what can we do about this? Because I don't want to just leave you hanging. And there's so much more I could go into depth on these with. And just a little bit of a spoiler alert for you podcast listeners. I have a really big project that I'm working on that I will tell you more about probably in December-ish. But it's going to be excellent if you like what you hear and see and watch wherever you're consuming this information. If you like the podcast, it is going to be like amazing. I'm so excited about it. It's going to be a way that you can go a little bit deeper, but yet still in a really digestible way. So super excited about that. And I'll be sharing more about that in the coming weeks and months. So Anyway, I want to leave you as we close with like, what can you do? Because sometimes it does seem really overwhelming. Like, okay, well, maybe I have, specifically we're talking about biofilm, maybe I have all this biofilm, like what can I do? So I want to start out with like foundational things and then just share a tiny bit about like how biofilms are broken down. So first of all, how you correct like basically almost all of the underlying infections, you have to have foundational things in place. These are things like clean, nutrient-dense food, clean water, really good sleep, clean air. Sometimes that's a really big issue for people. You want to make sure that your drainage pathways are open. These are things like your lymph draining properly and your gallbladder and your liver working and your pooping and all of those types of things. That's how you get things out of your body. You might need to target parasites. And we'll talk a little bit more about that specifically in the next episode. Those are things that are really super important. Movement would be included in that as well. And just getting outside in nature, sunlight, all of those things are just sort of foundational day-to-day things that are needed so that our body can have the energy to function properly. It does also go back to nervous system. If you're constantly in that stress, fight or flight state, your body's not going to prioritize healing. And so just to try to get out of that as much as possible is going to be super, super key. And so those are just kind of the foundational things that I wanted to mention. I am going to share several resources for you in the show notes or in the description of this video, depending on where you're taking in this information. I'm going to share some information just to help you kind of keep learning on this topic, things that I've made that will help you to kind of just kind of continue on this journey of yours. So make sure you look in the description or the show notes. So that's kind of, those things need to be in place for sure. But to actually break down biofilm, there are something called biofilm disruptors. And so there are several different things that can disrupt biofilm. Essential oils can disrupt biofilm. There have been several studies on tea tree. Tea tree is a really good biofilm disruptor. There's also been studies on thyme. Thyme is a little bit stronger. So I would definitely start out with maybe tea tree and using that topically. And then thyme, you could use that one internally or topically as well. It's a really strong one. So just make sure you're working with somebody on that and that you're using it properly and make sure you're using the proper quality, of course. But those are two that have been studied in disrupting biofilm. You can also use proteolytic enzymes for disrupting biofilm. One of my favorite ones is CT-zyme from Cellcore. That one can be used as a digestive enzyme if taken with a meal, but if you take it away from food, it can really help with breaking biofilms down. So that one's really great. I'll make sure to put this information, of course, for you. And then there is one linked in my full script. I have several different ones on there, so I'll make sure to put that. It's kind of just a public thing I've put together, a grouping of things that you can take that do dissolve biofilms. And so that's something you can use supplements, of course, to do that. And that's a really targeted way if you know you have this issue, if you know you're dealing with underlying infections because you're starting to see symptoms. And I'll talk more about symptoms on the next podcast. But again, I just kind of wanted to give you a simplified introduction to this underlying infection series, and then also, of course, biofilm specifically. Also want to consider if you are looking to break up biofilms and kind of start this process, that you would need a binder, most likely, to mop up and help get out some of the things that are being released whenever you break up biofilms, because you have to think like there's a lot of different things encapsulated in those biofilm, and there's such a big range. Like some people just have chronic health issues that this is often at play at, and they have a lot of these biofilm sacs. Some people don't have that many, and so there's not going to be as much being released. But if you are not sure, or if you are trying to kind of do this on your own versus working with a practitioner, which I would really suggest, that will be the best case scenario. But if you are going to try to do this by yourself and kind of go through and use some of these tips, I would highly recommend taking a binder. And that's just something that will mop up what the biofilm releases and help to get it out of your system. And you just have to ensure that you are having 1 to 3 bowel movements a day. That is super, super, super important, because that's how you're going to get them out. And that's what I see the biggest hang up with mostly is people just aren't having as many bowel movements as they need to. And so that's just something that you definitely want to make sure you work on before you start any kind of process like breaking up biofilms or addressing parasites, things like that. But I will say it works so much better and it's done so much more concisely with working with a practitioner that can help you with your specific needs. So I have myself and other team members in our practice that are trained in this. And so, of course, I'll put that information for you as well if you want to just check out what we offer to see if it might be a good fit for you. Because I can't not mention that when I'm talking about this, because that is the large majority of what we do, especially with our comprehensive clients, is take them through a deeper detox as it relates to their symptoms and what I'm seeing needs to be addressed. So we are very trained in this, and it's what we love to do is to help people get better. And this is just part of the process of that. So if you feel like that would be a good fit, I would love to chat with you more about it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But I'm excited about this series. I think it's going to be a great one. Again, trying to just simplify the topic of underlying infection. So if you're in for that, make sure you tune in for the next few episodes as we end up season 1 of the podcast. I'll see you guys on the next one. If this episode has served you in any way, I would love it if you'd share any aha moments or takeaways over on Instagram and tag me at Kari Coody. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so we can continue to learn and grow together.